Hello there, it's me again, Gavin Walsh, part of the St. Kevin Files. Recently, I promised you a video that would go through the truths of what really unfolded 73 years ago with regard to Aer Lingus' first ever fatal crash. It was a DC-3, which was like the 737 is today, the workhorse of the world fleet. The DC-3 was then the most ubiquitous plane, and at one point 90% of all carriers worldwide were using it, and I believe as high as 95-96% in the United States were using it. And this was all in the post-war years, so you're talking 1945 up, and Aer Lingus kept them right up till the late 60s, and they were the backbone of Aer Lingus fleet in the after the war and into the 1950s and early 60s, before other planes like the Fokker and the Vicon came along. But a very, very robust and a very reliable plane, and they had a lot of built-in safety. They were extremely well ruggedly built, and they could crash land almost anywhere, and they could stop in a very short space of time. Of course, the downside was that they were unpressurized, which left them particularly prone to bad weather. So there'd be a lot of turbulence on board. And in 1952, this plane crashed. It was called the St. Kevin. Aer Lingus were calling their planes after saints right back from after the war, and it was their most recent model. They had only just purchased it 2 years earlier, only about 18 or 19 months earlier, and everybody was tragically killed on the plane. It was a standard scheduled commercial revenue service flight flying from Northolt, which was a military airport, but that the British government allowed to turn over to civilian airplane flying while Heathrow was being built. Heathrow was still under construction at that point, and Northolt itself was a RAF military base, as I've said, but believe it or not, it was the busiest airport in all of Europe. And at that time, Dublin to London was the second busiest route in all of Europe. Obviously, because the two countries were islands, and their two large cities were London and Dublin, with huge populations, and the fastest way to travel was by air. Now, probably 99% of people went by boat and by train and boat, but only the select few flew of people who could afford to fly in. The St. Kevin airliner was a 28-seater, and all Aer Lingus DC-3s were either 24, 28, and some of them were 32, but most of them were 28-seaters. And on this night, there was 23 people on board. And that represented, I believe, about a 73% payload factor, which was pretty standard for the time, was in it. And it was January 10th, so it was after the hullabaloo of Christmas. So there was a little bit of a downturn in traffic figures, but nonetheless, Aer Lingus were plying the route between 8 and 10 times a day, each day, all year round. And obviously, those flights would increase in the summertime and in the weeks at Christmas and stuff like that. But this particular, it was a Thursday, January 10th. It was just a normal wintry Thursday, and the airline were flying the route from Dublin to London, but there was a little caveat in between. They would take a shortcut at a place called Daventry and branch off to North Wales, and by doing this, they were saving gasoline or aviation fuel. They were saving time, about 10 minutes off the flight time. And obviously, they were saving wear and tear on the engines, because the engines are done by flying hours. So overall, it was a substantial saving at the end of every year to the airline. And whilst the airline did not mandate this route, it was heavily encouraged, and the pressure was on the pilots to take it. Now, in my investigation into the British government's investigation, which is in volume 3 that will be done, you can see that I completely obliterated the nonsense claim that up to 4 in 10 planes didn't take the route in the winter. It was a fraction of that. The pressure was on the pilots to do it, and the pilots had recently formed the IALPA, or Irish Airline Pilots Association, and they had also been given pension rights, which they never had, and permanency in the job, contractual permanency, which they did not have. So the pressure was really on them to produce, and as a result, very, very few pilots opted out of this direct route. Now the alternative to the direct route, which is in essence the way it should have been flown, was to fly directly from beacon to beacon to beacon up as far as Wallasey, which had a beacon, which is it's a suburb of Liverpool, Birkenhead, I believe. And they would have a beacon approximately every 30 miles. And then when they'd get to Wallasey, they'd take what's like a dog leg. So if you think of a dog peeing, for want of a better description, they'd take a dog leg route across, and they'd cut straight across, and then they'd follow beacons across North Wales and a final beacon out on the Welsh coast, and then across the short distance of the Irish Sea, which is about 65 miles, and down into Dublin, Collinstown, as Dublin Airport was then known. But at Daventry, which was about a half an hour north of London flying time, what they done was they branched off and they took a direct route all the way to North Wales, and that was a very lonely route of 149 miles, and they had no beacons or anything along the way. And everything was great in good weather, and everything was great when they had three-man crews, a radio operator who acted as a navigator. But as part of the sweetener with the pilots to give them their permanency that I just mentioned and their pensions, the crews dropped from 3 to 2, so they effectively dropped the navigator, and those navigators were summarily fired by late 1950. Now, some of the captains, one particular captain called Captain Handley, Tommy Handley, brilliant pilot of his era, and the second chief pilot, Neil Lingus, and the president of IALPA, he strenuously objected to this, and consequently he got a caveat put in that a captain, if he demanded it, he could have a radio officer, and that this was agreed to for a very short amount of time. And then there were 3 routes where it was tentatively agreed to, and one of those was obviously, one of those was between Dublin, Dublin to Amsterdam, which had a stopover in Manchester. And the reason that they were allowed on that second segment was because of the curvature of the earth. They would be out of reach at a certain point out over the sea between East England and Holland. The other one was coming into Glasgow. There was another blackout area, and very sadly and prophetically, the third area was in Snowdonia. And of course, this is where our plane came to grief. Now, I will show you over the next segment of videos as to why the accident, not so much why the accident happened, but why the outcome after the accident happened went the way it did. It was basically a complete stitch-up. And I'm going to go into detail and prove to you conclusively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the entire investigation and the subsequent inquiry into the investigation was a complete sham. And please do bear in mind that this investigation was an official British government public inquiry run by the highest people in power you could think of. But it's what went down behind the scenes that enabled all of this to happen. And I plan to name everybody. And if anybody has a problem with that, I say sue me. I have all my facts in order. I have witness statements that the Aer Lingus assumed and were actually certain they had destroyed. And thankfully, some of those witnesses are alive in North Wales today, and I've interviewed them, and some of them have attended launches, and they've spoken on camera about what they witnessed. And everything they witnessed matches the original witness statements and matches what I had tied up as the plane's final flight path. And basically what the investigators did in order to protect this dangerous route that the airline were running, they put the plane going the other direction. Fantastical, but all true. And they put it 20.5 miles off course. And that was very important to do that so that they could bring another factor in called headwinds. And they could basically stitch up the flight crew of the St. Kevin. Now, the most unforgiving part of all of this is not only was Captain Keohane blamed in the wrong, largely blamed in the wrong for this crash, he's still in the plane today. They did not take up the airplane. In my opinion, and evidence strongly suggests this, that they did not take it up because it would show that the airplane had already suffered a crash prior to the fatal impact with the ground. And as a consequence, senior Aer Lingus officials and management ran the investigation, which was illegal under the rules of the day, and I will name all of them in the coming videos. And I will give the dates that they did this, and some of them were that confident they even put their names to this kind of stuff. But an entire cover-up, a huge cover-up, and unfortunately for me today, the cover-up continues because our own national broadcaster will not touch the story, as to be expected, of course. And So just bear with me as I get through this, and all I ask of you is be there for me in terms of viewership. Please feel free to comment, and please feel free to question anything I'm saying. Because you, the viewer, is all I'm going to have. You know, I've exhausted everything I have on this. I've given 14 years of my life to it, and a hell of a lot of money, a lot of it investor money, and it's just time now to let it all come out, and it's not going to be hidden, and it's going to be quite ugly on anyone who doesn't want it coming out. And the best thing is to face up to what was done is done, and let's just get and do it. Let's get it out there. Finally, to anyone out there that says I'm a crackpot or a conspiracy theorist, any of that nonsense, what I say to you is I will meet any person, anybody from any government agency, any time, any place, anywhere. I will meet them in public or in private. I will meet them on camera, in camera, off camera. I will meet them on a one-to-one basis or a one-to-infinity basis. Anybody, anytime, any place. I will bring nothing along except what's in here, and more importantly, what's in my heart. And I look forward to anyone who wants to challenge my story. Be my guest, because I would love to see any holes poked in it. Okay? Thank you, guys. Take care.